Evansville, University of Indiana.
Good afternoon, colleagues. We are back in session. And at this time, I recognize Vice Chair Duncan for the last committee report, the Business Operations Committee. Vice Chair Duncan.
Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of Todd Chastain and myself, we lead the Business Operations Committee, and we have several items for today. Our first item is an action on first reading, which is approval of contracts over $500,000. There's only one contract that's listed. It has to do with our storage of data and moving towards having better, higher capabilities of analytics of that data. Are there any questions about that contract? Not hearing any. Let's go on then to Biz Op number 2, which is State Board Policy Amendment for Policy Laws and Guidelines Governing School Attendance. Let's call on Alexis Schaus to guide us through this review and change of policy.
Yes, this is Alexis Schaus, the Director of School Business. Good afternoon to you. BizOp 2 recommends the approval of changes to the School Attendance and Student Accounting Manual. This is a State Board of Education document that includes policies on student membership, attendance, class size requirements, and school calendar. I'd like to recognize the work of School Business Student Accounting Consultant LaShawn Creech and her work collaborating with different divisions within the department. This year was different in our revision of this document due to the pandemic, and some of the modifications and additions that were needed are in response to that. You have two documents in your materials. One provides the chapters of the policy manual with the recommended changes, and the other is a two-page summary of the changes that is provided purely for facilitator review, and you can see this on the screen. It is not part of the policy. So the chapter 1 includes policies on eligibility to attend a North Carolina public school, and it is recommended to amend to reflect legislative changes for children of military parents and to delete items that were repealed in legislation. The changes to Chapter 2 include policies on attendance, and it's amended to define attendance for both when the student is on site and when a student is off site. And this, of course, is pertinent to the school phases they're in operation currently. It also specifically defines when a student is determined to be present on the initial day of enrollment, which is a material item for the determination of membership, which of course drives funding. It includes requirements to ensure that there are sound attendance policies and procedures at the public school units, which are critical for the tracking of student attendance, compulsory attendance violations, and identifying chronically absent students. These policies will be important even post-pandemic, as we've seen a significant increase in the virtual instruction delivery. So it's these policies will live past the pandemic. The last item in this chapter is an addition to ensure consistent accounting for pre-K students who are eligible to receive various services, whether it's EC or LEP services, etc. Chapter 5 relates to school calendar. The amendments include a definition of modified calendar and a year-round calendar as legislated in Senate 704. There is an addition to include the changes to the 2020-21 calendar requirements related to the start dates and the remote learning days. That is also in response to session law and the pandemic. And finally, for this chapter, there's an inclusion of two items that LEAs are required to report on an annual basis. Chapter 6 is technical in nature and documents the student accounting codes related to the changes noted. And with that is a brief summary of the items that are being recommended for approval. And I'm happy to respond to any questions there may be on it.
Thank you, Ms. Schaus. Are there questions about this particular item? All right, not hearing any. Let's go on to BizOp 3 then, and this is where we likely will spend the bulk of our time today for the BizOp committee. In preparation for the budget efforts, we're going to discuss our legislative and budget priorities. So just as a reminder, this is a process that starts in November, and this year we've gotten a little bit of head start on it, given all the events of the year. We spent a good deal of time looking at priorities and budgetary items because of the various emergency funding that's come about. The process would typically be that we would get the finalized budget to the OSBM by sometime in the latter part of January. We may have till February this year. We'll focus on working towards the latter part of January, but we may end up having a little bit of leeway at the end, and certainly to the extent anything develops from a budgetary standpoint, that will be helpful for us to have the time to deal with it. We've split this presentation up into 3 parts. In the first part, like I said, the board has spent a good deal of time already talking about legislative and budget priorities for this year. We've asked Freeburg McKinney to go back over with the board those items and give some presentation about those items and budget priorities for the board to start to consider. The second area, and Catherine Johnson and Daniel Palmino will be involved with the second and third items. Second item is to give us a reminder of what the budget process looks like. And the third item will be the department, in addition to contributing tremendously to the items that Freeburg McKinney will be reviewing on our behalf for the state board, in which the department and many different departments of DPI have been very much involved in the development of. But in addition to that, the department itself, DPI itself, has some things that, as an overview of what potential needs are that we need to hear about and listen to and factor in as we look at the overall budget approach for this year. And a good deal of time's been spent on that, and we'll look forward to hearing that report as well. So that's sort of the backdrop. As a reminder to everyone, and I'm going to state what all of us have heard at this point, there is genuine concern as to what the amount of revenues will be for the coming year. Obviously, we've got some assistance from the federal funding during the course of this year. We don't know that there'll be further federal funding. We do not know one way or the other about that, obviously, but there's certainly not something we can yet count upon anything further in that regard. And there is some real concern that's been expressed by many legislators and by the governor's office as to what the exact revenue picture will look like for the budget during the biennium. So we need to keep that in our minds as we go through this process. At the same time, it's important that we identify what the priorities are so that we're situated to be adaptable and to go as far down a list of priorities or as short a list of priorities as necessary in order to try to accomplish the goals. We do this with the backdrop of we spend a lot of time on strategic plan, and we spent a lot of time looking at the Leandro litigation and some of the requirements of that litigation as we go forward. And more importantly, we've focused on, more directly than Leandro, not more importantly, but more directly, we've focused on important issues that are needed in our districts around the state in order to help assist our students, particularly in light of the pandemic restrictions that have created real drawbacks, particularly for some of our most vulnerable children in the state for their educational progress. So we very much look forward to these presentations, which will be helpful to us, and then I look forward to hearing board members' comments and thoughts as we begin to work through this. So at this point, let me turn to Mr. McKinney.
Thank you, Vice Chair Duncan. Good afternoon, Chair Davis, Vice Chair Duncan, Superintendent Johnson, board members, advisors, my colleagues here at the board and here at DPI. I wanted to begin today's presentation with a heartfelt congratulations to our newly elected State Superintendent Catherine Truitt, Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson, and re-elected State Treasurer Dale Falwell, and the many elected government officials locally, statewide, and across our nation. We look forward to working with each of you individually and to partnering with you collectively as the State Board and DPI continue to lead the state's alignment of the strategic plan and the action framework priorities. There is a hope of promise and partnership as we move into 2021, and we are excited to lift up and serve North Carolina Public Schools as we transcend COVID-19's impact on our communities. As newly elected Superintendent Truitt stated in a recent NC interview, we have to put students at the center. And this echoes the work of so many of our educators across our great state and the mission and vision of our districts, our PSUs, this department, and our board members. Here's the synergy that is possible and the collaborative spirit that is embedded in this transformation. We welcome you and thank you for your committed service. I also wanted to take a brief moment of personal privilege to lift up the veterans across North Carolina in honor of upcoming Veterans Day. As the older brother of a current Armed Forces service member, my sister who served the U.S. Navy in the Intelligence Division, currently in the U.S. Embassy in Delhi, India, I've witnessed her dedication and leadership in representing the multiple pathways to prosperity that are available to our students in North Carolina through the 3 E's: enlistment, employment, and enrollment. And I've also been privileged to learn under the leadership of many veterans throughout my experiences as an educator, particularly through the mentorship and friendship of our current State Board of Education Chair, Eric Davis, my friend and legislative liaison, Ann Murtha, our newly named North Carolina State Teacher of the Year, Maureen Stover, over 20 DPI staff members, and over 30 General Assembly members who have served our country admirably. We thank you and we honor you. I will now move to the legislative priority piece. And I wanted to begin with this page as we continue to use this as a format that we are building to streamline and collaborate our efforts with DPI directors and divisions. And I think this has been evidenced by the multiple presentations over the last few days and how they have aligned their initiatives, their priorities, their goals, and the budget and policy requests with this framing in mind. So again, as you reference this document, you will see the 9 statewide strategic plan priorities approved by the State Board of Education with links. And I know that it's a little difficult to see. I'll try to change that, but the hyperlinks are up there in each of the blue individual columns. As you look at this next graphic, as Dr. Townsend Smith and I continue to present and share with multiple stakeholders the board's strategic plan and priorities, we felt that this graphic really reflects the underlying physical foundation of the State Board of Education's guiding principles, the roles, the duties, the expectations, and the systems of support. So if you spend a few moments on this diagram, you can see again our mantra from the planning and work session, guiding our way forward. And then the system guiding principles, these lenses and perspectives that are deeply intertwined with each and every priority and initiative and program that we are considering, which is that lens of the whole child and equity. And again, as we use this graphic and sharing out, it also shows the responsibilities and duties of the State Board of Education at the top, that system of support and the designing, the strategizing, the engaging, and the sustainability of these programs and initiatives. And then lastly, our roles and our duties and our partnership with the Department of Public Instruction and aligning our priorities and our budget requests with this approved State Board of Education list of priorities. So as we move now to the first of these priorities, early grades reading, you can see, again, we're going to use this setup so that we're looking at the Leandro Action Plan priority, the Strategic Plan Action Framework, our goals, and then that Strategic Plan Action Framework priorities. As you can see here, there are 2 main budget needs, and then also a funding request requirement for expanding pre-K opportunities and underserved communities, which aligns to the Strategic Plan Action Framework. We are actually excited to visit Polk County Schools next Thursday to learn from Superintendent Aaron Green and Kathy Harding, who is Polk County's pre-K and school health director, about their exemplary model of pre-K so that we can gain a little bit more information to serve our districts across our state as we've listened to specific conversations, including Swain County Superintendent Mark Sale and Halifax County Superintendent Eric Cunningham in lifting up their voices in pre-K and underserved communities. The second legislative priority is teacher preparation and the professional learning opportunities and compensation pieces surrounding this priority. It's been incredible to listen again to the alignment from the presentations over the last several days, particularly in regard to teacher preparation and the professional learning opportunities. I feel like the teacher working survey really lifted that up with the need for professional learning opportunities and PD. We got some data that really supports that 8.3 in community involvement that Alessandra Montanari and Dr. Martin's team lifted up, the 10.6% that was involved in that teacher leadership piece, and how it affects the willingness of our educators to remain in the profession. As you look at these specific priorities, you can see the largest one here is to increase teacher pay to compete for the top of the Southeast in 2 years. I've attached just a little note there. Analysis is required to make sure that that number of 130 million that was approved in the June 4th State Board of Education budget continues to do that. As you follow other specific pieces in teacher recruitment, including the Teach and See piece, I wanted to also lift up an anecdotal story about the funding to expand new teacher support program. In a recent visit to Ashe County, Superintendent Issa Cox and her team really lifted up the benefits of NTSP with her teachers, her beginning teachers in Ashe County, particularly their relationship with Betsy Rosenbaum and App State. So that is a program that we're seeing across the state really benefiting our beginning teachers. As you move down, you can also see the 4 million for high quality culturally relevant curriculum development and professional learning opportunities for our teachers. This again speaks to that professional learning opportunity PD need. And then you see a series of funding requirements and requests that align to more of our strategic priorities. I did want to lift up a couple of these, particularly from districts who we've spoken to, increasing master's pay and that incentivized advanced degree attainment. This also would be very helpful for our border states. So many of our districts that are aligned to some of our border states and making sure we're incentivizing those degrees. The Drive Task Force recommendations and increasing recruitment and retention for the pipeline of educators of color in North Carolina. And then also looking at different measures of assessment and accountability, including teacher effectiveness. Further down a little bit, we've been listening to conversations specifically with Northampton Superintendent Pamela Chambly and Graham County Superintendent Angie Knight about specific needs by districts and helping with teacher preparation and the support of alternative pathways. Some of these that were lifted up were 2+2 and Teacher Cadet and Grow Your Own, as well as Troops to Teachers and TA to Teachers. These are programs that continue to be discussed and used throughout our district. So providing added support in both finances and also in evaluation would be quite helpful. Also looking at culturally responsive training for pre-service teachers. We've seen this in the recent presentation by the School Safety Task Force as really underlying how are we building out a strong school climate and how this supports our school safety needs. And then lastly, the funding requests in support of community teacher leadership models. Again, pointing to Alessandra Montanari's presentation earlier, the impact of models that we have seen work in Alamance County, Pitt County, Rutherford County, and Durham in Teacher Leadership Academy, as well as partnerships that the State Board of Education works with, like North Carolina Public School Forums, Education Policy Fellowship Program, or Go Global NC. These continue to engage our educators in an educator diplomacy, a style of learning process, and really synthesizes the findings of the North Carolina Teacher Working Survey. I think the Ingersoll research, again, with school leadership and teacher leadership and the impact of student achievement and retention really points to this priority of the board's strategic plan. That leads us to, again, that Ingersoll research pointing to school leadership with the third strategic priority and principal preparation and professional learning opportunities and compensation for our principals. You can see here there are three main budget requests. One, to increase principal pay to be competitive with neighboring states and ensuring principals that cannot be penalized for leading low-performing schools. So that would come in some of the policy pieces. As that North Carolina Teacher Working Survey revealed, 32% of how we retain our teachers is through that school leadership. So looking at funding for the development and implementation of a turnaround principals program, funding for working with a school leadership academy, and then also, if you look down at some of the funding requests that we're looking at, other ways to grow our own with our principal recruitment models, providing support for culturally responsive training for our principals, and then that principal leadership model. And I think to the strength of our principal and teacher advisory voices on this board, the more opportunities that our principals have to be able to contribute, whether that is on strategic planning or policy committees, could really speak to how they could help continue their leadership across the state. Number 4 is supporting the whole child, social, emotional, and student mental health. It has been great to see the alignment of Matt Hoskins and his recent presentation, his team's recent presentations, and specific breakdowns of the student mental health plan. Yesterday, we heard about his projected $46 per pupil, which would lead to direct services to students, the mental health promotion, PD and data collection and program evaluation, as well as personnel. So this shows a deep alignment in that with what we're required by statute, but also to our strategic plan here. That also leads to another request of $62 million for school support positions. This continues to be lifted up by districts across the state in respect to the impact of COVID-19 on our students and their mental health, and also looks to align with the School Safety Task Force and work with their state action plan and their first two requirements. Also looking at $32 million to support exceptional children for future services, continuing North Carolina's commitment to provide an exemplary leadership with school nutrition. Across the nation, North Carolina continues to be lifted up as a model, both in their work with the General Assembly, but also in No Kid Hungry and Share Our Strengths partnership with the State Board and DPI. And then lastly, the $4 million to support allotment for limited English proficiency students. This has been something that continuously districts have lifted up as a need. And this also reflects the State Board of Education's partnership with the Latinx Hispanics Action Coalition and several of the needs that they continue to bring up. Number 5 is school accountability and teacher effectiveness models. You can see here at this point, there are no specific funding requests, but we would like to lift up the fact that this continues to be a question that we need to look at and address. And prior to COVID, we were looking at school accountability models, hoping to really continue that, and also models for teacher effectiveness. The continued impact of COVID-19 on measurement and evaluation do lift these up as a concern as we move forward over the next couple of years, and how we're going to attain and use that data and measure it and evaluate it. Also with the discussion that we just had with the advanced teaching roles data, how can that continued tension in measuring teacher effectiveness be looked at through pilots and models addressed with this priority. The 6th is school and district assistance and turnaround. One of the main asks here is again in a reflection of the district regional support team's presentation recently for rebuilding the staff capacity within DPI to lead that district and school transformation and provide the regional and statewide support. So as we remember, the 10% of the CARES Act funding, while that has a 2-year expiration date, because this is the biennium budget, then this would then go to help supplement that also as we're moving with that 4.5 allocation, but then moving forward to sustain that and continue that human capacity and capital need. They're also with PRC 015, and this is not actually listed on here, but continuing to lift up universal broadband access and the technology fund needs of our states. to make sure that technology, the district technology fund continues to stay healthy. And then also continuing operations and funding from House Bill 1043 and 1023 for districts in regard to the learning management Canvas system. Number 7 is connecting high school to post-secondary and career opportunities. As you can see down, there are 4 current budget requests, and then also a funding request required for equity and academic excellent coaches to support career pathway development. This is something that Mrs. Shaw Coltrane brought up yesterday in the need to support the work of increasing access to AIG and advanced courses for our students of color and often historically marginalized students. So this is something that not only would provide coaching into those post-secondary opportunities, but also work backwards into the 8th grade, where we've got these equity and excellence coaches who begin to work with our students at younger ages and looking into advanced math classes in the 7th and 8th grade years, which is often a predictor for going into engineering, and then looking at those pathways as they're moving into high school, whether it be IB, AP, CTE, and just really providing added support at the district level in that process. Lastly, number 8, increasing the DPI support positions. There are a list here that were approved in the June 4th State Board of Education budget. There will also be added needs here that the department will present to you all in a few minutes. But these are the ones that were originally approved and wanted to lift up the establishment of the DPI Office of Equity, Inclusion, and Diversity Affairs, and to support that guidance of regional staff. This was discussed and approved at the last state board meeting, and again, really reflects the teaching working conditions survey and the focus on equity. And then lastly, kind of a catch-all, a support for other agency budget requests, which may not fall specifically into one of the aforementioned 8 strategic priorities, but are definitely needs that we need to consider moving forward as we prioritize and strategize which of these needs we'll put on our priority list and how we will tier them moving out. I did want to lift up one final funding request required there at the very bottom for additional personal protective equipment for districts. This is something that continues to be lifted up moving into 2021 when all of the PPE funds from the CARES relief funding will need to be spent by December 30th of 2020. So our districts will continue to have more needs, particularly as more districts will begin face-to-face instruction following the new year. So just to keep that in mind as we also talk with the General Assembly on added and needed funding. Just a last mention, right now we're in kind of in phase 1 of this process. So looking over these budget requests and then sitting down and discussing this, looking at the additional funding requests required from DPI that they're about ready to present, and then really holding discussions and collaborating with division directors as we've been doing all along to how we tier these out and how we prioritize these. As Vice Chair Duncan mentioned earlier, there will be a need to prioritize these as we're moving forward. And then we will solidify these requests as well as begin the next steps, which will be how do we then synthesize all of these requests with needed policy requests moving forward. And then in January, really begin when session comes back January 26th, discussions with General Assembly members. So I thank you for this opportunity and hand it off to my colleagues here at the Department of Public Instruction.
Great. Freebird, thank you very much. And thank you, board, for the opportunity to provide this collaborative annual budget presentation. This is Catherine Johnston, Deputy Superintendent for Operations, and I'll be joined by our CFO, Sharon Bernard, and our budget manager, Daniel Parmenter, and of course, David Stegall and Bev Emery for questions as needed. We have a great deal of information to share with you today. So in an effort to begin this budget development process with full transparency and a full context of our overall financial picture, of public education in North Carolina. So I'll set the framework with a discussion of the multiple years that we'll be referring to throughout this presentation. There are many different years we'll be referring to. So this slide frames the different years. Last year's budget, which just ended, is the ended June 30th, is of course the first year of the last biennium. The current year that we're in right now is the second year of that biennium, fiscal year 2021, and that was certified by various mini bills. And then we'll end with discussion of the upcoming budget process, which is the beginning of the long session for the new biennium, fiscal year 21-23. And those are the requests that Mr. McKinney was just referring to that we're trying to compile to be sent to the governor's office and OSBM. We anticipate in January. Okay, and these statistics are just a reminder of really the magnitude and the importance of just what we are budgeting for. Aligning our scarce resources impacts all of these students and schools throughout North Carolina. So again, as a high-level overview, we do compare ourselves to our state peers in the Southeast. And as Mr. McKinney just highlighted, one of the board's priorities has been our ranking on average teacher compensation. And as you can see, we're currently ranked second in all of Southeast. I believe only Georgia is higher than us currently. Okay, and the next slide shows the North Carolina average compared to the national averages, which of course we track and monitor as well. And breaking it down into the North Carolina components of the budget, this is just the state appropriated dollars. And as you can see, the tracking and the comparison of state appropriated trends year over year in North Carolina. This does not include any the additional receipt funds, such as civil penalties or lottery funds. This is purely state appropriated dollars. And finally, we compared state appropriated dollars in the previous slide to our ADM each year to ensure that we are maintaining, and as we see, we're even increasing funding levels on an ADM basis. So with that general overview of our finances, we'll now move into some more of the specifics of the education budget and address the elements requested in the board's policy GOVR 7. And I'm turning it over to Sharon.
No, Dan.
Dan, excuse me, please proceed.
Yes, I'm Dan Palmatier. I am the budget section chief, and I'll be taking the last year's covering the last year budget section, and Sharon will be taking the current in the current year and the upcoming budget process. Some of the major things for last year that we will be covering are going to be the reversion items, the lapsed salaries, and the carry forward that we submitted to OSBM and got approved for. So reversions for last fiscal year is money that was returned to the general fund that was unspent by the department. Approximately $90 million was reverted back to the general fund, 88.5% of which belonged to the state public school fund. The monies inside of that fund oftentimes are very restrictive, and we can't use or flex them for any other purposes. Inside of the school fund, a lot of those subpots are created by vacant positions out in the LEAs. So the reversions would be for salaries, associated benefits, and those types of things. As a reminder, the state public school fund, 1% of the fund is approximately $125 million. With the onset of the COVID epidemic, OSBM did request that we try not to expend any more than we needed to so we could revert some funds back to the general fund and use those for response. Next slide, please. This is the tracking of reversions year over year. As you can see, last year, we made a much better effort to use the money we had. But there were also some mandates that we did have to pay that was not supported by legislative appropriation because there was no budget bill passed over the biennium. Next slide, please. The reversions that were sent over or sent back to the general fund were split up into these categories of accounts. The biggest one is marked as reserve accounts. Those are basically holding areas inside of the school fund that were reverted back to the general fund, along with public aid and assistance. Lap salary is another item we used to fund some things that we didn't have funds for last year because of the lack of a budget. We lapsed approximately $6.7 million we had lapsed salaries of about $6.7 million last year. The bulk of that went into purchase services. And then the other half of the money basically went into closing up negative balance accounts at the end of the fiscal year. The purchase services that were funded by lapsed salary were things like the NROC subscription for the year, some charter school software, some money for Friday Institute, and the biggest component we had was a DIT charge. We previous years covered those with credits, but this year we didn't have a credit, so lapsed salary was used to cover those funds. The last part of the end of the year was the carry forward. And the carry forward is the ability for the department to use prior year funding in a current year to cover expenses that didn't occur prior to July 1st. And these really for us fall into two categories. One's called a category A, which is legislative allowance for us to carry funds forward to pay for prior year expenses. And this is the bulk of the carry forward amount, 93% of it. Some examples of the money that was carried forward is money that was for program enhancement teachers, at-risk students, and the UERS system. The second part of carry forward is what's called category C, and that is money that we can reserve and move between the years to cover encumbrances that went unpaid at June 30. And of the carry forward amount, 7% of this was covered under category C. And just an example of that are contracted services in building upgrades and furniture for the department. Covering last year, we'll now move to the current year, which will be presented by Sharon Bernard.
Good afternoon, school board members and fellow DPI employees. I'm Sharon Bernard. I was hired into the DPI as the new CFO as of August 10th. So I hope you will extend me some grace today, as this is my first in-person school board presentation today. And I look forward to working with all of you. What I would like to point out first is just kind of a general overview here. The agency and the state public school fund total is roughly $12.32 billion. Now you can see how it's divided up. Most of the 81% of the appropriations are through the state. We have federal, and then there's other. Next slide, please. The COVID funds that were granted to us through the Federal CARES Act, which was passed in March of 2020, are around $836.5 million. Now, they are not accounted for in the FY 2021 budget slides. The budget is based on certified amounts. The funds will be spent over 19 and 20, 2021, or is eligible until the funds expire. The COVID funds were directed by the legislature into different categories. The coronavirus relief funds are $316 million, roughly 38%. There 394.6 were directed to the Elementary and Secondary Schools Emergency Relief Fund. That's the ESSER fund you see there at 47%, which is the majority. The GEAR funds were directed by the governor's executive order as the governor's emergency education relief fund. That was around 7%. And the rest of it were redirected state funds, possibly from carry forward money inside the department to be used for COVID. Next slide, please. The total budget, the $12.32 billion by fund source, as pointed out from the previous years, you can see the change. In this year, going forward, 2021 budgeted is going to be roughly around $9.997 million from state, 1.516 from the feds, and the other will be 807. The education budget by area for 2021, as you can see the comparison, the agency, DPI, the agency itself, accounts for around $223 million, divided up by state appropriations, federal funds, and the other amounts. The state public school funds is $12.1 billion, which is all our money that goes out to our schools, our LEAs, our charters, and all of that. The state public school funds area of expenditures are divided into different areas. The most obvious would be your instructional personnel, which makes up around 63% of that. Non-instructional support personnel, 4%. Categorical programs, 28%. Grants, other school level programs, 1%. Your other appropriations, 3%. And your general administration, 1%. The budget preparation process that we've been going through for FY21-22 to FY22-23, which will be the long session of our budget process. Next slide. The base budget, which sets your recurring budget, is basically an ongoing budget that's for the continuity, which outlines your providing the same level of services in the future years as it has been in the current year. Adjustments can be made for items like lease increases, receipt analysis, and transfer accounts, etc. Various deadlines due until January. The expansion budget, which Daniel and I had meetings with all of our division to ask all the division if there were any needs to expand or contract the budget. This could also take in policy changes and instructions forthcoming from OSBM, and sometimes if an expansion budget is approved, it can become part of the base budget in the following years. Next slide, please. As you can see, the 2021 long session budget process calendar, a lot of these meetings have already occurred in October. We are here at the November 5th annual budget presentation. We will begin to prioritize and have the discussion early December, and we will finalize this budget request at the state board meeting in early January. Expansion budget request is due to the OSBM at sometime in January. We don't have an exact date on that yet. All of these budget requests and our presentation to you is all to support the State Board 2025 strategic plan. And this is a generalization, but it also elaborates on Freebird's detailed plan and objectives to fulfill these goals, which obviously are to eliminate opportunity gaps by 2025, improve school and district performance by 2025, and increase educator preparedness to meet the needs of all students by 2025. Thank you.
The next section will be covering the expansion requests that were submitted by divisions and sections within DPI. We made every attempt to pull out duplicates from the prior SBE lists that are out there. So hopefully if I duplicated something, I'm sorry, I did my best here. The other thing to keep in mind is the SBE goals, when they were given by departments and sections, they were placed in here. Some of them I had to classify myself, so I may be off on one or two. Hopefully I'm not. First slide is basically dedicated to the governor's school, the Eastern school, and the state school. And they had numerous requests inside of their categories. We rolled them up into these catch-alls for each school. But they're basically a lot of requests from the three schools for catch up of their budgets for increases in costs that are ongoing in the schools, operational cost increases, maintenance of their facilities cost increases. In some cases, there are requests for various different types of coordinators and personnel, and just some general equipment to help with the safety and security of the campuses. Next slide, please. As we move through each slide, I'll pull out the bigger items on each slide instead of going down through all of them. Excuse me. Yeah, the driver's ed and oversight. That is a request that is receipt supported. With the way the unit is functioning now, there is going to be a request that instead of asking for additional appropriations to adjust the percentage of dollars that is available to admin to support this request. And it's going to be a situation where not only will we have to submit this request as an expansion item, a $0 expansion item, but we will also have to have a special provision to change general statute. Next slide. The biggest one we have on here is the UERS stabilization fund. We are seeing increases to the program, and the program is going to run out of funds very soon. More than likely the end of the year, with the way everything is looking based on the spending plan and the current budgetary authority. There are a couple other IT items on there also towards the end. And this is the last slide. When all these items are accounted for, it's a grand total of about $6 million recurring. About $38 million is a one shot in the arm items, or the one-time items. The education building security system upgrade, that right now is marked as 200,000 as a one-time security upgrade. That was actually found as part of a security assessment that was done by TVA. these are the items that we have for today. We are open for discussion and questions on the items presented inside of the slide deck, and be happy to answer what you need.
All right, thank you. Let me thank Freebird, Catherine, Daniel, and Sharon for a very comprehensive presentation that I think gives the board an excellent starting point to review these pieces of information. And as you suggested, there may well be some questions as we get our self comfortable with all the things that we're going to need to discuss here. So let me open the floor to our fellow members and any advisors who have questions at this point about some of these budget items that are being discussed of great importance to the state. Amy White.
Thank you, Vice Chair Duncan. I just wanted to offer my appreciation for the inclusion in the request for school turnaround, and particularly the nod to keeping the fan on for sustainability and school turnaround. Particularly for those positions will be key to making sure that the practices that we put in place are able to be continued over the long haul. So thank you for that inclusion this particular round. I know we've got a long way to go, but that's where my advocacy point is, and I appreciate the recognition.
Just to get out there early and often.
You're not kidding.
All right. Other questions and comments, thoughts?
Mr. Duncan, this is Matt Smith.
Hello, Matt. Welcome.
Thank you so much. This is a question for Mrs. Johnston. One of your slides earlier indicated that the North Carolina teacher compensation, including local supplements, is second in the Southeast. And I saw some dialogue with you and Ms. Kamnitz in the chat about trying to tease out those local supplements so we could see how North Carolina teacher compensation without local supplements compares. So I know that you're going to work on that. I had several kind of related questions, and you don't have to answer all these now, but they are what's on my mind. The first is, I wondered if we know how many North Carolina teachers actually earn that average salary. Second question is there a way to represent teacher salaries as they are indexed to cost of living, so that a teacher, for example, living in an urban area that may have a higher cost of living may actually be earning effectively less than maybe a teacher living in a rural area with a lower cost of living and also a lower supplement? Just wondering about some kind of index between what teachers make and what it costs to live in their areas. And then the third question related to that is there a way of determining if the average teacher in North Carolina is in fact making second in the Southeast for his or her years of experience and qualifications? So, for example, do our first year teachers earn second in the Southeast, or do our urban teachers earn second in the Southeast, or do our advanced teaching roles teachers like that? Is there a way of comparing our teacher salaries aside from some other metric than average teacher compensation?
This is Catherine. Thank you so much for those questions. And we look forward to digging into those to get you the answers. In the meantime, I will remind you of our school financial transparency website that does have a great deal of this information provided there. And we'll go back and make sure that every one of your questions, if it's not answered there, we'll get it for you specifically.
Mr. Bristow, is it fair to say the reason you're raising those questions is part and parcel of, if you have a continuing advocacy point, it might be that we should take a careful look at advocating for teacher compensation. Ms. White was very straightforward what her advocacy point was. So is that, I mean, is it fair to say that you believe, based on your very important role as an advisor to the board, that that's what you hear?
Mr. Duncan, I think you probably synthesize kind of where my thinking was on that. I just know that average teacher compensation maybe doesn't provide the granular detail that I might like in seeing how we stack up against other states in the Southeast. I do think a regional comparison is very important. Certainly not a national comparison. Regional makes sense. But if we are trying to move to number one in the Southeast, I hope that number one would translate for all teachers at every stage of their compensation plan.
All right, thank you for those thoughts. Other thoughts, questions, comments?
Mr. Duncan, this is Olivia. I have just placed my question to Ms. Johnston in the chat box, so I won't go into the details. If she has a question, we can talk offline.
Could you read it for the rest?
Oh, yes, I will. It is.
Access to the chat.
I will. It's kind of worded not in the best grammatical sense, perhaps. It's sketchy. In your investigation of school budgeting in the Southeast, I would like to know state rankings based on the percentage of the total budget that goes to salaries, and that would be minus the supplement.
All right. And Catherine Johnson, is that something you can add to the list that you're developing on these questions?
Yes, ma'am. I'd be happy to provide that for Ms. Kamnitz and all the board.
That's Olivia. That last question.
Ms. Kamnitz and Olivia's chat questions, we'll be happy to get you answers.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so to keep this straight Ms. White would also like to add to that, what are the cost of living indexes in those respective states so that you have a apples to apples kind of comparison. If you can generate that information. I realize we're giving you a lot of requests here, so thank you for your patience on that. And was Ms. Kamnitz's chat box request the same as Dr. Oxendine's? As I said, we can't access the chat box here, so we want to make sure we hear everything from a question standpoint here.
Mr. Duncan, I'm happy to clarify that. I didn't realize that it couldn't be seen. And publicly, I'll ask the question. I was interested in seeing our rankings in the Southeast based solely on state allocations, minus local allocation, and that's what sort of started this conversation.
Yes. Okay. So I think several people are driving at the same question and asking for some other contextual information around it to make sure they understand cost of living requests. So all right, very helpful thoughts. Other areas of interest, obviously we've shown a lot of interest in the compensation issue already with some very good and thoughtful questions, and that's after staff's already gathered a lot of data. So appreciative of that. What other kinds of questions or areas do we have in mind to be thinking about and prioritizing?
Mr. Duncan, this is Mariah Morris.
Mariah, is that a little fuzzy here? Is that Mariah Morris?
Yes. Can you hear me better now?
Much better. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. I actually would like to touch on the teacher salary a little bit before we leave that topic area. Another point of consideration when we're thinking about all of these valid points that Ms. Oxendine is bringing up and Ms. Kamnitz and Mr. Bristow-Smith is the role of the master's pay step in the salary ladder that has been taken away for teachers who are coming into the teaching profession. And so it's interesting to keep that in mind when we're not offering that pay advancement to teachers, but that is going to impact our average teacher salary when you're looking at it mathematically. And that's particularly important when we're looking at recruiting our new teachers into the field, because taking away master's pay is something that is probably making teaching less attractive to college graduates, especially in STEM fields where they could enter other professions and make a lot more money right off the bat. So I would like to kind of tease that out a little bit. I don't know exactly what metrics we would want to look at with that, but I do think that's important to consider. And then the other point is when we're looking at average pay with local supplements. A lot of conversation is pointing at, well, let's look at how much it costs to live in this area versus how much that teacher is making to justify less salary for a teacher living in a more rural area that doesn't cost as much as one of our urban areas. However, in a rural district, I just want to say there's another consideration that plays into this conversation, and that is recruiting and retaining teachers to our rural spaces when they can go to other districts that are close by and make more money. So we could have a teacher hypothetically living in a Harnett County or a Moore County or a Lee County who chooses not to work in their district, but they'll go to Wake County or Durham County and make significant more money. So it's not just the impact on the individual when we're looking at these different pay rates, but I also think we should look at the impact on the districts that are offering less supplements.
All right, thank you for those very good points. And why you raised master's pay, my recollection, and there are people here far more knowledgeable than I am, but my recollection is that part of the master's pay issue at the time it was eliminated had to do with some assessment on the part of some study or some general belief that teachers with masters were not getting any greater results, if you will, for teachers who did not have masters. So if we have that discussion, whatever that research is or says, I think it's important that we familiarize ourselves with it and be knowledgeable about it for any kind of discussion on that. And many of you already may be and may already have that research at your fingertips. But I think it's important that we understand that as we take up and understand those issues and be in a position to thoughtfully discuss them when questions arise. And I think that's a question that, based on past history, my recollection is we certainly will want to be able to discuss thoughtfully.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Camden, it's interesting that you would raise that. While I just now Googled that connection, I found a study from 2007 just on one quick pass. But I think it would be interesting to maybe Dr. Tomlin might be able to help us with that, but just maybe some information on that would be helpful.
Maybe, and there may be studies from other states as well that we might want to tap into.
Right.
That are of more recent vintage. These are very good thoughts, and for us to, for anything that we are working on, I think, in addition to, as Ms. White said, ready to advocate for the reasons why and the points that make it fully appropriate for and justifiable for these expenses to be made.
Mr. Duncan, if I may.
Is that Matt again? Sorry.
It is, yes, sir, Mr. Duncan. I just enjoy BizOp so much. I wanted to chip back.
We all love BizOp.
So it's, I think I got a chuckle in the room. I'm so glad I could do that for everyone. So to Mariah's point, which is, I think, such a salient one, there are so many other reasons to provide advanced compensation for master's degrees besides the pegging master's degrees with teacher performance. For example, we just had a discussion previously about advanced teaching roles, but also about the nature of teachers looking to grow within a profession, developing their own content knowledge, their own pedagogy. And currently, as I understand it, unless a teacher's job requires a master's degree, he or she is not compensated for that advanced degree. But if we truly want to model lifelong learning, and if we want to create systems of not just compensation, but also school cultures that promote teachers pushing themselves and growing and continuing to be on the cutting edge of research about their content, also about pedagogy, then a compensation plan that incentivizes master's degrees helps to do that. It helps also when we're looking at recruiting lateral entry teachers that are coming from private industry and they have worked master's degrees, and for us to say to them, sorry, your master's degree will not get you compensated, that does not make our profession attractive. So I think to your point, we do need to, be familiar with the data about teacher effectiveness as it relates to master's degrees, but I think also about broader considerations with regards to why teachers stay in a profession, what makes them grow and develop, and then also how to recruit from private industry and from non-traditional pathways. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. And I think my point is we need to be ready to talk about all the reasons to support. And if there's any discussions or reasons not to support, we need to be in position to respond to those. And so you're doing a very good job of advancing that discussion. So thank you for that, Matt.
Mr. Duncan, this is Olivia.
Yes, Dr. Arson.
I want to add to the point that was made about the master's pay and all the things that the master's pay do to leverage interest in the profession, retention in the profession, and so on and so forth. I think that conversation, I would love to see that conversation presented within the context of a career ladder. And the career ladder to me has a lot of implication for advanced teaching roles. My hope a few years ago is that the ATR pilot would move us closer to putting our heads around together to think about a career ladder model in North Carolina. In the private sector, an employee, and I'm basing this on my late husband's 32-year career in the corporate world, but an individual was not given a pay raise. There was no incentive unless it was based on performance and or it was based on moving up the corporate ladder. And that doesn't mean going from a line supervisor to a vice president. It was a couple of steps up. Just to pay, add to other than your normal pay raises, but to bolster on top of a pay raise. Just now, this is one corporation. Just did not happen unless it was a promotion, unless it was a promotion. Aside from the normal raises, that goes back to the point of I do wish the General Assembly, along with of course the State Board of Education, would give serious consideration to a career ladder in North Carolina. Thank you.
Thank you. Those are also excellent thoughts and something that, as you well know, it continues to be looked at. Other thoughts or comments on this today? Well, if everyone would please take some time to think about this and to come back and provide input to the committee, to Mr. McKinney, to Ms. Johnson, to Ms. Palmeter, to Ms. Bernard. I think input will be very helpful to get back so that we can continue to work through this and start the process of prioritizing. And everyone will have your own particular list of how to prioritize it, but eventually we're going to need to come together as a group with one that we can all agree on. So shaping it early will help our discussions. And although it seems like a lot of time until the latter half of January, it's not really very long. It'll get here quickly. So thank you for very good discussion to everyone. We have a couple more items to get through. Our next two items are consent items. BizOp 4 is the 2021 through 22 calendar waivers report, which recommended the State Board of Education approve these waiver requests. BizOp 5 is right of entry and easement for fiber optic utility installation in Morganton at the North Carolina School for the Deaf. And the request is to allow the State Board to confirm approval for a signature for a state property form that will allow that easement to occur. Those are both consent items, but I'll pause in case anybody has a question on either of those. Those are different. We usually, our consent item is for finance officer and BizOp. So these are a little different, and I'll pause for a minute in case anybody has a question on either of these. All right, not seeing any, let's keep going. You have your requested updates in front of you, the agency vacancy report and the monthly budget report. On the monthly budget report, there have been some modifications that have made. Catherine Johnson, you may want to take just a second to review those to everyone so that as you continue to work on this and modify it to meet the needs of the board's rule and the work that your department is doing, you may want to take a moment just to let the board be informed about your continuing work on this report.
Sure. Thank you for recognizing that, and we will continue to update and modify and add to the information that you all would like to see on a monthly basis. Now we have added brief explanation to each of those codes. We realize it's like a different language sometimes, and the codes don't mean much without an explanation and tying them to the nomenclature that we're all familiar with. So we started with adding that component to this monthly report. And certainly as we receive additional questions or requests to add information, we'll be happy to do so.
All right, very good. Thank you for this work. And if board members, as you review it and study it, if you have any further questions, please let us know from the committee, and we'll also please let Catherine Johnston and her colleagues know so we can make sure you get your information that you need on that. Are there any questions on the agency vacancy report this month? All right, not hearing any. We have two last items, which is the executed contracts report and the planned contracts report. We have not received any questions this month on any items on here, which we sometimes do from board members. Are there any questions anyone has on either of these two categories? That is the executed contracts and the planned contracts. All right, again, not hearing anything. Chair Davis, I believe his office completed its report, and we give thanks to the members of the board and the advisors for their valuable input.
Thank you, Vice Chair Duncan, and I'll add my thanks to you and the subcommittee and DPI staff and board staff for some fine work there. We have a number of, and so this concludes our committee work for the day. We have a number of new business items, and to begin with, I'll call our Treasurer Falwell, for a brief report. Treasurer Falwell.
Treasurer Falwell, are you there?
I'm here. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. Are they ready?
Yes, sir. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry. I was just signing off on the pricing of $700 million worth of DOT bonds that we've been trying to get out of the oven for nearly 2 years, so I apologize. Great hearing the presentations today, and just want to give everybody an update in case I haven't done this. We have just our pension plan that is, I guess, one of the largest expenses of the state board. The pension plan was just designated by CEM benchmarking as being in the 0 percentile in terms of the expenses of running the pension plan. And that's not a tribute to me, it's a tribute to the people over in our investment management division. But the reason it should matter to every member of the school board, State Board of Education, is simply this. As we look at lower interest rates, earlier retirements, and higher life expectancy, rising life expectancies, all blessings. Those are blessings in our world, in our life, but they're not blessings to a pension plan. So anything that we can do to cut expenses, things that are within our control, ultimately mean that the bill that we send to the school districts every year is helped by having lower expense ratios. So I want to give credit to the team at the investment management division of being in the 0 percentile in terms of the cost of actually operating the plan. On top of that, there's an administrative cost, and our other benchmarking group, the same benchmarking groups that the previous treasurer had a second in the among our peer group in the world in terms of operating the plan, not the investment expenses. Now I'm talking about the administrative expenses of operating the plan. So as our largest customer, you are our largest customer. We just wanted to report that to you. Secondly, in case I didn't inform you, we are taking steps within our state health plan that where you're also our largest customer to make sure that we are focused on the 5 big drivers of diseases that are impacting our employees. And the first thing that we've done recently is we've eliminated all cost of insulin. And we have determined, based on what we've heard, that in some cases insulin costs have tripled in 7 years. And when people don't adhere to their insulin, we have major expenses and major problems going forward, both for them individually and for us as the state health plan. So we've eliminated all costs of insulin starting January 1st. It's funny that not everybody knows who the school board members are. No, not everybody obviously knows who the treasurer is, but just another indicator that we know who they are and the plight that they're facing. And a lady came up to me and said, the cutting of insulin cost as it relates to her children is like the biggest pay raise she's ever gotten. So it's not necessarily that I have anything to do with what people make, but we try to have a big impact on what people take home. And lastly, along those lines, I think I've already reported, but it's going into effect now that we're past open enrollment. Our Medicare Advantage contract, which is for all the 65-year-olds and above who teach, taught, protected, or otherwise served, just negotiated 5 years in the oven, a zero cost to the member for the basic plan, $4 a month cost per month for the dependent, $4 per month for the dependent, and zero cost to the taxpayers. So we're taking that nearly $1 billion savings, we're putting it toward our unfunded healthcare liability, which stands at about $28 billion right now. And I'm saying that to the school board for two reasons. Ultimately, because the pension plan has been so well funded, the health plan has been equally unfunded for 40 years, that ultimately all these little things manifest itself in higher amounts of money that the school systems have to send us to fund the pension, to fund the health care, and fund the prescription drug benefit. And the last piece of good news along those lines is that daughter of a 84-year-old retired teacher called me last week from Harnett County, who helps her mom, like so many caregivers do, go through the process of open enrollment and generally paperwork. And they calculated that this 85-year-old person, that the savings on just the Medicare Advantage contract, not the insulin, just the Medicare Advantage contract, the savings to her next year for this lady who's on fixed income is going to pay all of her property taxes, all of her utility bills, all of her natural gas bills, and for every year that contract's in existence. And that's just a big deal for fixed income and lower income people of our state. So thank you for the opportunity to share all that. And I say all this to you not to draw attention to what I'm doing, but that I'm standing on the shoulders of so many hardworking people here who have a loyalty to the monies that you entrust us with, and you, State Board of Education, the school districts across North Carolina, being our single largest customer. So Chairman Davis and school board members, thanks for indulging for the last few minutes, but these expenses are a big deal and a major part of your budget, and just want to let you know what we're doing about it.
Treasurer Falwell, thank you for that report, and even more, thank you for serving as a colleague of ours on this board and for your professional stewardship of the funds that are entrusted to our state and eventually impact every student across North Carolina. We appreciate your service.
Thank you.
The next item of business concerns the North Carolina Education Corps. Past Monday, the Executive Committee of the Board met to receive recommendations from the initial inaugural cohort of the North Carolina Education Corps. Former State Superintendent Dr. Mike Ward and Mr. John Paul Smith, Program Manager, provided an overview of the submitted applications and detailed 17 Tier 1 and 2 districts for the board's consideration. As a result, the following districts were approved by the Education Committee of the State Board as the initial cohort and early adopters for the North Carolina Education Corps: Ashe County, Camden County, Clinton City, Cumberland County, Elizabeth City, Pasquotank, Halifax County, Hickory City, Jones County, Lexington City, Mount Airy City, Newton Conover City, Clemens County, Pearson County, Pitt County, Stanley County, Vance County, and Winston-Salem, Forsyth County. For those of us familiar with these districts, you can tell that they represent a broad cross-section, geographically and otherwise, across our state. These requests total slightly more than 100 core members, recruitment of which has already begun, with applications due by November 22nd. And we welcome any recommendations from our fellow citizens across the state for candidates for the North Carolina Education Corps. This first cohort will, upon receiving training, will then deploy to these 17 districts at the beginning of the second semester. In addition, we've received application for from two districts, Wake and Durham, for the second cohort, which will be presented for the Executive Committee's consideration next week. These applications will essentially double the number of core members. This second cohort is expected to deploy at the beginning of the fourth quarter, and we welcome other districts to submit their applications for cohort 2 as we continue to expand this partnership over the summer and into the next school year across our state. These districts will partner with the Education Corps to provide academic and non-academic supports to our students at this time of great need. Our thanks to the Governor's Office for providing gear funds to our districts for this effort. An additional update, the North Carolina Education Corps website is now live and can be found at nceducationcorps.org, to which we would encourage you to direct any interested parties for serving on the Education Corps. Dr. Ward and Mr. Smith are available to provide additional details if there's any questions or concerns. At this point, I'll open the floor for any comments from my colleagues or advisors. Well, thank you. We'll have further updates on this exciting new partnership across our state in the coming months. Our next item of business today concerns the withdrawal or repeal of rules, and I'll call on our interim general counsel, Mr. Tom Zyko, for this item. Mr. Zyko.
Tom, Mr. Zyko to present the.
There we go. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Superintendent, members of the board. You've already heard from Dr. Evans today about the 32 rules that she is proposing that the board repeal, and you've heard about the good reviewing the rules that are pending before the Rules Review Commission. This item I have before you today is 8 more rules that we have discovered in the course of those reviews that are unnecessary, either because they either repeat the content of state or federal laws, statutes, or regulations, or they're merely internal management procedures for the state board, the department, or they substantially duplicate existing rules or regulations that are already in the code. There are 8 of these rules that are before you. They can be repealed without affecting the operations of the board or the department. And I would propose that the board approve that these rules be withdrawn from consideration by the Rules Review Commission at this time. I'm happy to answer any questions about the particular rules, if there are any.
Any questions for Mr. Zyko?
Chair Davis, this is Olivia, just a kind of a procedural question. I'm wondering if there is a kind of a scheduled time during the year or every so often that you engage in the process of looking for redundancy. How does it come to your attention that there's duplication?
Well, these have come to our attention in the course of reviewing the 116 rules that were presented to the Rules Review Commission back in May. I've been working closely with the staff to review all of those rules and to respond to Rules Review Commission requests for technical corrections and objections. So these are all related to those 116 rules. Now, to your point, as part of our statutory obligation and duty under Chapter 150B, the department has to engage in an annual review of all of its rules to identify redundancies and rules that are no longer necessary. And that will be part of the ongoing work of the department. And so as those rules come to the attention of the divisions, we can do one of two things, I suppose, according to the board's preference. We can bring them to the board by division as divisions review their rules, or we can package them and bring them one time. But there's a statutory annual obligation to review and present to the Rules Review Commission rules for repeal, and that will be an ongoing obligation. Does that answer your question?
It really does. I think I know very little about the process, but based on what I've learned today, it seems to be necessary and it makes plenty sense. I had no idea that it was, that it was codified in statute, but thank you very much. That's good explanation.
You'll be surprised what you find in those statutes when you start reading.
It reminds me of how much I need to go through my closets. This your discussion and Dr. Evans. Thank you.
Other questions? Hearing none, this item will be before us in a few moments for action. Anything more on this, Mr. Zyko? Okay. Hearing none, our final item of new business before we move to taking action on the matters before us this meeting is on behalf of our Vice Chair Duncan. So we are delighted to bring to the board our recommendation. Okay. Do that interference. Let me start over with this last item. You'll recall for some time now, the board has been ably represented by Mr. Zyko as our interim general counsel as we search for a permanent general counsel. Vice Chair Duncan and I are pleased to bring to the board our recommendation for our new general counsel, Allison Schaefer. Ms. Schaefer is well known and even more well respected to the education community across North Carolina. Previously a partner with Harrington Smith, most recently Ms. Schaefer served as a general counsel for the North Carolina School Boards Association. In addition to bringing deep knowledge, superb professional relationships, sound judgment, and a keen intellect, Ms. Schaefer brings a burning desire to elevate the academic performance of all students across North Carolina. We know that she'll be a valuable addition to our team and will contribute to the progress of every student across North Carolina. So that will be before us in a few moments for action. Ms. Schaefer is expected to start, assuming approval today, beginning of the year. In addition, I'd like to, at this time, to thank Mr. Zyko, who has ably served us over the past few months. Mr. Zyko equally brings a passion for raising the performance of our students and has filled the gap ably and, in my opinion, turned into superb performance. We'll find a more full way to thank Mr. Zyko in the coming weeks. With that, board members, we will move to our action items. Board members will now vote on any item requiring action from your committee reports. A thorough discussion and report was provided on each item, including one item from yesterday that needs a bit of revision is EICS 1, and at this time I'll call on Ms. White for that item. Ms. White.
Thank you, Chair Davis. Yesterday, we had a question from Vice Chair Alan Duncan about the accountability data as it's reported from our 2 virtual charter schools. The question was posed back to the Office of Charter Schools to amend the language within that report. And so board members at your approval, what we would like to do is change the language in that particular statement to reflect accountability data for the 2 virtual charter schools be separated from aggregated data of all charters for internal DPI use. Using internal DPI use addresses Mr. Duncan's question about how the data would be used externally. There are several reasons for disaggregating this data. First, the virtual charters were established and extended through a legislative process, as opposed to the authorization and renewal process for which all brick and mortar charter schools participate. Virtual charter schools are critically different from face-to-face instructional brick and mortar charter schools, and therefore merit separate data analysis and consideration. Separating the data will be used for internal DPI analysis of virtual charter school performance. So if we can have that reflected in the minutes and in that particular statement, that should do the trick.
Thank you, Ms. White. So ordered. Any questions from my colleagues on that modification to EICS 1? Hearing none. The consent agenda before us is primarily not complex and may have come to the board for discussion in a prior month. I note also that board members have seen these consent agenda items for at least a week. So at this time, I ask if there's a request to remove any item from the consent action or action on first reading agendas. Hearing none, I ask for a motion to approve the following: the September 28th, 2020 meeting minutes, the October 6th through 8th, 2020 meeting minutes, and EICS 1 through 2 and 5 through 8, HRS 1, SLA 1 through 2 and 5 through 8, ESNP 1 through 2, BizOp 1 through 2 and 4 through 5, the withdrawal and repeal of rules as presented in this meeting by Mr. Zyko, and the selection of Allison Shaver as our general counsel. Is there a motion to that effect?
Mr. Chairman.
Is there a motion to that effect?
Mr. Chairman, can you hear me?
Motion by Ms. White. Is there a second?
Second. Ms. Camnitz.
Second by Ms. Camnitz. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, Dr. Townsend Smith, can you call the roll to capture the vote?
Yes, sir. Dr. Oxendine,
Yes.
Ms. Camnitz,
Yes.
Mr. Keenan,
Yes.
Mr. Hall,
Yes.
Dr. Tipton Rogers,
Yes.
Ms. White, Mr. Chastain, Ford,
Yes.
Treasurer Falwell, Vice Chair Duncan,
Yes.
Chair Davis.
Yes. Motion carries. That concludes our business for today. Thank you to all staff and presenters for this November 5th, 2020 meeting. I ask now for a motion to adjourn this November 5th, 2020 meeting. Motion by Ms. White, second by Mr. Duncan. Dr. Townsend Smith.
Ms. May. Dr. Arthur.
Yes.
Ms. Chemnitz.
Yes.
Mr. Keenan.
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Hall.
Yes.
Dr. Tipton Rogers.
Yes.
Ms. White.
Yes.
Mr. Ford.
Yes.
Vice Chair Duncan.
Yes.
Chair Davis.
Yes. Motion carries. Thank you all for good
And
work. Be safe. We're adjourned.
Treasurer Falwell's a yes.
Thank you, Mr. Falwell.
Got you, Treasurer.